Wouldn't it be nice if Adam Sandler didn't count the dates up all so wrong? And wouldn't it be nice to talk together in a format that goes way too long? You know it's time to rewind, baby, for 19 dates of this movie with Drew Barry. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Good morning, listeners. It's another beautiful day here on It's Time to Rewind. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and joining me today is my guest, Robbie Sherman. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Bubba.
No problem. It's good to have you on. And this season we have been discussing 50 First Dates, but since I finished that movie, I am going back 6 years based on when the movie came out and 19 years based on when the movie took place. And we are talking about 1998's The Wedding Singer. So I put I've been wanting to do some more Adam Sandler movies in my kind of extended hiatus, and this one was really the first one that jumped out at me that I really had to cover because 50 First Dates is Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore, and this was their first on-screen coupling. And I got to put a call out for guests, and you were really the first one that jumped on this movie. And I had actually never seen it before
Wow.
last night. Yeah. So, before we get into it, let me ask you, what's like, why did you jump on this movie? What's your history with this movie?
Well, I'm a middle class white kid, or I was. So Adam Sandler was a big part of my life for a long time. Whether or not I was seeking him out or he was just being offered up on cable. But this movie, when I discovered it, I still have the VHS hanging around somewhere. And this movie was the first thing that showed me Adam Sandler was more than just a very silly comedian who I felt I had outgrown by the time I saw this, because I think I was about 13 or 14 when I saw this. I think the Billy Madison, uh, yeah, Happy Gilmore stuff. I think all that had kind of gotten out of my system, and I was on to more nuanced stuff. Yeah, I think I watched The Maltese Falcon when I was like 12 and stuff like that. I was seeking out more refined, interesting things. But when I saw this, I realized that Adam Sandler had like what he could do as an actor along with the people he was working with could be more than just really silly stuff. Like it could have genuine commentary. And I think this was one of the first movies to kind of form my idea of like what romance is now that I look back on it. There's probably some people that would say that that might be for the worse and the better, but I mean, the guy's name in the movie is Robbie, so obviously I probably bonded to this psychically, like in a way that I couldn't have figured out when I was a dumb kid.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know I said I never watched this. I have watched, I'd say, roughly half of Adam Sandler's filmography. I've missed a lot of his big ones, but I've watched a lot of his big ones too. Like I've seen, um, of course, 50 First Dates. I covered that, and I had seen that before covering it. And of course, like the two kind of namesake of his company, Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore. And let's see, I've also seen Click, um, one of his more recent ones, Murder Mystery.
Is that
Uh,
good?
I like the first one. I was surprised that there was a second one. Uh,
I just when I look into that and I think about watching it, it just seems like it has the thinnest premise possible for a movie.
but I also haven't seen Big Daddy. That's another one of his big ones, or The Water Boy.
You're not missing much.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I've always kind of heard that Big Daddy is one of his better ones. as
I
well. At
mean,
least one of his more popular ones.
on the scale of like really bad Adam Sandler to respectable Adam Sandler, that's kind of in the lower middle.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But I this one was definitely one that I always wanted to see because I'd heard that this was, kind of top tier Adam Sandler. Like other than maybe some more of his dramatic movies, but this was like kind of top tier Adam Sandler comedies.
Yeah, yeah, and watching it today, I still feel that way. I still feel like its humor is if okay, it's not always politically correct, but it does function as genuine character study of like suburban America. I feel like it sits alongside John Hughes' filmography and kind of bests that a lot of the time because it's about adults and there's that they can just handle more mature stuff with it. I wish he had another romantic comedy that did it for me like this one. Maybe I need to go to Blended. Maybe that's my other choice.
Yeah, I haven't really heard too much about that, well, one way or the other. I kind of think that was is just I think feel like that's one that a lot of people forget because it's kind of somewhat later career Adam Sandler.
Yeah,
But I don't
but
know. I might circle back around to it.
it has the same director. I've never watched it, but maybe that's my alternative for this. I don't know. Something about his collaborators. We don't really get the same balance in his other movies as we do this one.
Mm. Yeah, and I definitely think that this one is helped that they really have a minimum of the juvenile humor. I feel like there is not really a whole lot of the Adam Sandler isms in it, and a lot of it is delegated to the character of Rosie. And I think that that really helps the comedy because having that juvenile, immature comedy come from the oldest character, I think that really works. And the actress that plays Rosie, Ellen Dow, she is fantastic.
She's incredible, and I didn't realize it when I was younger, but I think part of the reason why I like this movie so much was because of her. Because I would skip it a lot when I would watch it, but I think the reason I was skipping it is because it reminded me of all the grandmother type people I had in my life, people that served that type of function. An elderly woman that looks after you in a certain way while you're taking care of them as well, because they're they're a little bit older and maybe they need somebody to keep an eye out here and there.
Mm. And I also think that this movie in general, I feel like it does kind of hit the standard romantic comedy beats. And I think that some of it I feel are a little bit more problematic looking at it in today's eye versus 1990s point of view because it's really about these two characters that are getting together, and they when they meet at the beginning of the movie they're both in relationships, and they end up together. And, they I mean one Robbie's uh, relationship breaks up on its own, and then he ends up breaking up Julia's relationship over the course of the movie. But at the same time, the movie goes out of its way to show that Julia's relationship is not a good relationship, and they put they make Glenn out to be the bad guy, so that way the audience is rooting for her to leave him and get with Robbie.
They they do such a good job of creating an unlikable antagonist to the degree that you don't ever question that you want them to be together because the way Glenn treats her that she will be far better off with Robbie, no matter what financial problems may come with that. You can just see what kind of husband Glenn is going to be. And they do just very subtle character work with that guy to get it across that this is not a person who cares about
Mhm.
that character. And yeah, I was really taken aback at times by how good they wrote that character, because every time he's on screen, there's just something you could hold against him. Like sometimes he's being a little too grumpy, like when they're in the club and the two start the two start singing China Girl, and when they get to the part about the line about just you shut your mouth, her and her sister look into each other's eyes and they say it like, and then they explode laughing. And Glenn like puts his arm around her shoulder and is like, "Yeah, now just you shut your mouth." And it really struck me as something uncomfortable to think about the implications.
Mhm.
And it's a little joke in this scene. It's not something that's big and necessarily drawn out. It's very subtle, and the implications of that subtlety are uncomfortable. And I thought that was very good character work.
Yeah, and even from the very beginning, whenever he sets the date for their wedding, just because she's basically kind of paid her dues, and even uh, going away from the Las Vegas wedding to having a bigger wedding that she wants, because are you? He says, "Are you saying no because you mean no? Are you saying or are you saying yes just to agree with me, even though you actually mean no?"
Yeah, and this guy is such a womanizer to a degree that he actively tells Robbie what's going on in that club scene, and I just think it's a crazy that like no one had ratted on him or done something beforehand to show like what a rat he is. Um, and that club scene has another very interesting male dynamic between Robbie and Glenn. The girls leave, and Robbie's in the position I've been in many times in life, which is you're stuck with another dude that you know nothing about and most likely don't have anything in common with. And you have to sit there and make idle conversation until the person you're actually with, in your little trip or whatever comes back. And
Yeah.
yeah, and they're at a very kind of racy club. I guess it's an 80s new wave club. There's also like breakdancing and stuff going on. Um, I think it's an interesting texture that they give the movie that they don't really show like just one type of music. Like there's all these different types of music that come in and out of different scenarios, and it always seems to fit well. There's new wave along with early rap and just like 80s pop going on too. Um, but getting back to my original point about this conversation in the club, Robbie kind of gives in, and they look over at a waitress who has a very skimpy outfit on, and he makes a remark about how incredible her rear end is. And Glenn really takes to that, and he starts sexualizing her even more than what maybe this little bit of just tolerable between friends observations is. And he goes so far as to call her a grade A piece of meat. And this is foreshadowing in our screenplay
Mhm.
to show you how Glenn will be brought down at the end of the movie by calling one of the waitresses a grade A piece of meat. And that is the crux of what gets everybody to go all in on the front, like the VIP area of the plane, the whole front row of that plane, to go in and like help him win Julia uh, away from Glenn. And yeah, I just think like the construction of the screenplay is so good in ways that Adam Sandler rarely has on the plotting level. And there's multiple examples of character payoffs like that throughout this movie.
Yeah, even though I did think, for the most part, the movie, I I enjoyed it. I do think that it was a little bit, hyperbolic at times, and especially that ending was just so over the top. It almost felt like it was something that belonged in a parody movie rather than a straight romantic comedy. Just how everything aligns so perfectly, and he's got the entire first class hanging on his every word, and he's got Billy Joel there helping him, being his wingman, and it's just everything that could possibly go right goes right, and then whenever he succeeds, the entire plane uh, erupts into applause. Even the coach section, which and nobody in the coach section heard his story, so they wouldn't necessarily have any reason to be on his side other than they just heard the song.
I I do agree that that does represent the more outlandish, cliched elements of this movie, though I think they're trying to be subversive. And when I say subversive, I don't just mean in that they're trying to subvert rom-com standards. I think they're trying to subvert the idea of what an Adam Sandler movie represents a lot of the time. Because I think if you look at the previous Adam Sandler movies, he's almost always like, getting off and away with things that are ridiculous, and people are just totally cool with him and all that. I think this is maybe the first Adam Sandler movie that actually earned his um, good guy ending, where he gets the girl and they are wed. And I never feel like before this movie his characters are nice enough or good enough, or I don't feel the humor around them necessitates you liking his characters enough to get away with some of the stuff his characters do. But they actually create likable like circumstances for Robbie as a character.
Yeah,
I hate saying
Robbie.
Robbie. I hate saying it. It makes me feel so solipsistic. I hate it so much.
Yeah, I think that his character in this movie does remind me a lot of Henry Roth in 50 First Dates, because they are both like basically, nearly perfect stereotypical nice guys, at least how they're portrayed in the movie. Because I know at least Henry Roth does have the beginning where he's supposed to be a womanizer, but he grows out of that like extremely quickly within the context of the movie. But here, this Robbie Hart is practically a perfect character. He's a fantastic wedding singer. He knows how to control the audience. And then whenever he's being a friend to Jody, he is just doing or Julia, Julia Gulia. Um, he's doing just everything perfectly. He's being the perfect friend, doing everything. He is treating her with absolute respect, and even like after the kiss and they realize that they have feelings for each other, he still does the respectable thing. And after like the scene in the bar, whenever he's ready to go to her and tell her how he feels, he sees her and it's that classic rom-com miscommunication to a certain extent, because she's happy because she's imagining she's like rehearsing being married to him, but he sees her through the window and he thinks that she's being excited about her wedding to Glenn, and so he backs off. And again, that's just like so much of just like the perfect nice guy situation to handle how everything is going.
The gift that she brings him when he kind of has a low key passive aggressive meltdown on her, and she storms off after like throwing the gift in the air of it being musical staff paper with his full name on it, engraved with his full name. That really like made me kind of choke up a little bit, honestly. Like damn. Um, I've been a musician for a while. I have a new EP coming out sometime soon when I can finish up all the advertising stuff. And when people do stuff like that for you, that's a real show of faith, a real show of love. And a lot of musicians, they don't respect gifts like that as much because they think like they're easy gifts sometimes. But yeah, I really just I felt like that was a great clincher in our little love story plot.
Hmm. Yeah, that's like just a really great moment, even though it did come after like the earlier moment of miscommunication whenever he heard from her sister, who I I like the fact that she's played by Christine Taylor, and that's I like her. I feel like she hasn't done a ton. Like I remember her. I believe she's the one that got her start on the Nickelodeon series Hey Dude.
Oh, yeah, I don't know anything about her really. I knew her from this movie. I think when I was younger, I probably found her very attractive, and that's part of the reason why I watched this a lot. And I kind of thought it was crazy that Robbie wasn't interested in her, but of course, the demands of our our romantic plot, make it to where Robbie cannot have any type of feelings for her. And I kind of during that club scene, I kind of do wish he was playing all along just a little bit more.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
like she's really like going out on a wing for him, and he's just near catatonic. I don't think this generation, and by that I mean like the latter millennials going into the generations past that. I don't think they romanticize depression as much, and I don't think they find it as charming a lot of the time.
Mhm.
But I guess that was another thing I liked about this movie was how just full on openly depressed Sandler was as a character when I was a depressed teen.
Yeah, it just like after his in the beginning after his breakup, um, being left at the altar, which that could scar anybody, and also I they do a nice little mini joke with his friend Sammy, which is another actor that comes back in 50 First Dates.
Uh, oh
He
God,
plays 10
Alan
Second
Coburn.
Tom. Yeah.
He's great throughout this movie. And I actually didn't like him when I was younger because I thought he was annoying, but I see what his function is as a plot purpose now. Like, okay, he's always there to be the opposite of Robbie, and
Hmm.
they spend this whole movie making him, and this is where they actually are kind of subverting romantic comedy tropes like John Hughes type stuff. Um, they just have him as like a hound dog the whole movie, a skirt chaser the whole movie, and it's really funny when he finally breaks down and tells Sandler that like all he wants to have is for someone to hold him, and then the the guy who played Blue, whose name always escapes me, he comes around and like holds him in his arms and is like, I'll be your friend, I'll hold you, and it's that perfect balance of funny and sweet, like breaking down the male archetype for me into like a complex character that has been putting on layers in his performance, and now he's a new character that you view him as.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good stuff on a scripting level.
Yeah. I think that his turn is pretty nice in that moment because he is just kind of is supposed to be like the quirky best friend, and pretty much like it's kind of like the quadfecta because you have you know nice guy Robbie, nice girl Julia, and then you have the horn dog Sammy, and then the sex positive Holly, and
Yeah,
they really have basically match each other. And I don't remember, but it's almost like you expect that Holly and Sammy would get together at the end.
yeah, I almost wish there was something like that, but in a way I kind of don't. I kind of like the idea of Sammy like being more comfortable with himself now that he's been emotionally open with Robbie, and yeah, I just really like his character. I especially love it when Robbie goes back to the bar and him and the old man are still hanging out, and there's like just I can't tell you the name of the song. I didn't look it up. I didn't have time, but there's just the most 80s sounding like drum track going on, and they're sitting around trying. Oh, the old man is doing a moonwalk, or he's attempting to do a moonwalk, and Alan Cover is like cheering him on, like, "Yeah, that ain't too bad, but you almost got it." It's so sweet, but it's also so funny, and I think this movie captures that type of tone in a way other films of his just don't. It's a shame.
Yeah, I also, I like the fact that this movie was set in the 80s. I enjoy all the music. I think it does help kind of set the tone to it, even though I do think that the movie doesn't really feel like it's set in the 80s. The movie feels like it's set in the idea of the 80s, because I think that a lot, especially with the costuming, they go too far where almost none of the characters feel like they're wearing 80s clothes. They feel like they're wearing 80s Halloween costumes.
I'll tell you the one joke in the movie that helps me accept the fact that they're wearing such elaborate costuming. When Robbie goes to the airport to try to get on a plane and meet Julia, the flight attendant who helps them board, he has this giant flock of seagulls haircut, and the joke is that they don't comment on it until the end of the conversation, and he goes, "Hey, do you like flock of seagulls?" And Sandra's like, "No, but I can see you do." And I like that little bit of self-awareness about its like use of outlandish 80s fashions that aren't regular people's fashions. They're the fashions of rock stars and people who are in music videos.
Yeah, it's like wearing the Madonna costume and the Michael Jackson costume.
Yeah, that that Madonna costume in the club is great. Actually, that's one of the best costumes throughout the whole movie for sure.
Yeah, it definitely looks fantastic, and I don't really have too much else to say. I did want to talk, just a little bit. I liked Alexis Arquette's character in this movie, George. I think that uh, she brought an interesting flair to it, and I was a little bit surprised to see doing the whole Boy George thing, and I didn't follow up on the timeline, but like I was kind of curious, and I had forgotten that she had passed away almost I think 9 years ago now.
Oh, okay. I knew nothing about that performer. I thought the humor wasn't as bad as it would have been from some other sources concerning that character, and I thought they actually they did a lot better than most comedies in the 90s would do, and they had a few moments where that character was just genuinely having a good time in their life and was not being ridiculed or treated like a source of embarrassment. Though they also do have their cake and eat it too with that type of humor, because there's like a whole scene where that, like at the beginning of the movie, where that character is singing a song, and
Yeah, Karma Chameleon, and that's the only song I know.
Okay, yeah, and the whole thing is just
No,
like it takes a minute and it goes around and it just shows everyone's face, and it's like the intention of that scene is to be like, yes, this character is considered disgusting in this world, and I don't know if that's supposed to represent the overall tone for what this character is to be viewed as, or if that's just a comment on the society at the time, which, even in the 90s, I think a lot of people held the belief that those people were less than human, yada yada. We're still having problems with that. But I think that's maybe the one part of the humor about it that I just really don't like. There's the other joke where they're in the baker's shop eating pastries, and it gets to Sandler and he eats like a slice of cake, and then he feeds a slice of cake to Alexis Arquette's character, and she eats it like real disgustingly, and she has like gross teeth, and I want to know the logistics behind the teeth, and I want to know like, was that something Alexis Arquette was cool with? Yeah, there's little things like that that are sketchy.
Yeah, I was definitely thrown off by that moment because that did feel like an almost out of place like homophobia moment, even beforehand, because it's like it was a chain of everybody feeding cake to each other, and then whenever it gets from Sammy feeding Robbie, then he just takes it out of his hand, and then it's Robbie feeding George, which I didn't, I feel like the makeup was done in such a way that it took me a little bit to even realize that it was George, because
Yeah,
the makeup was so weird. It's like they made them look extra ugly without having the Boy George makeup on.
yeah, and there's a scene not far from that where everybody is trying on dresses and George is the last person to put on a dress, and they come out and everybody is like thinking like she looks really good in that dress and she's so happy, and I felt like that was good on a level, but I also feel like a lot of the humor before it kind of cancels out the good intentions that might be within that scene. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think its relationship to queer representation is maybe just a little sketchy. And I don't speak for anybody in the LGBTQI community. I, I I'm mostly a straight person. I'm mostly attracted to female presenting people, and I uh, I still have a lot of trans friends, and I think being critical about that type of thing is important if you want to consider yourself a loving person towards the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I was even so much where in that opening scene with George singing, I was, my point of view was that the joke was just that George was not a very good singer. Like I didn't even, it didn't even cross my mind that the audience was reacting that George was,
Oh,
kind of a a feminine presenting or androgynous type of Boy George type of character in the 80s.
I don't think they're singing any worse than Adam Sandler in that moment.
Mm.
So I feel like that can be the only joke, because once they step up there, everybody just starts getting this look on their face like who let them up there, and then even one of the people in the crowd even goes, "That's disgusting," and that's like a very clear telegraph for the gender politics that a lot of this movie plays around with as far as trans people go. Um, I do I do think Alexis Arquette has control over her presentation in a way other trans characters wouldn't have on a certain level. So there's
Yeah,
that
and I'm
angle
not
to it.
sure what the timeline was for her coming out as trans, because I know that like I'm not super familiar with her with her presence, and I didn't even realize until kind of just looking her up after seeing her in this that she was like an early um, representative, and like an early uh, proponent for trans rights early
Okay.
on, relatively early on. Like now it's trans is a much more common word, but even in the early 2000s, it was still, not,
Oh,
it was still, a growing trend.
there was there's so much comedy from that era that has gender issues like that. I'm a big Simpsons fan. I'm And some of the earlier humor with Patty and Selma is a little like mean spirited and strong because
Mm.
I know a lot of Patty and Selmas in my life, and they're not, they don't necessarily deserve ridicule. They're yeah, but I don't think Patty and Selma should always be considered figures of ridicule. They're independent women that deal with a lot of different circumstances. um, and they did a lot of strong work trying to make up for some of the broader humor concerning them on that show. But at the same time, you get up into the later 90s, early 2000s when the humor was becoming edgier and they were having to compete with South Park and Family Guy. Uh, you could have some real strong anti-trans jokes going on there, and it was a light thing. Unfortunately, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't romanticize any of that stuff anymore. I don't. Like I always hated Ace Ventura when nature. Yeah, like both of those Ace Ventura movies because they seem to have a lot of weird gender humor going on in there. And the end of that
Mm.
first one, I've never liked. I thought it was like even before I understood anything about gender presentation or anything like that, I always just thought it was cheap. Like you couldn't end this movie differently. You couldn't do something different to make this interesting. And now I view it as like a real mean spirited gag. That's about saying that trans people are trying to hide who they are all the time, which that isn't statistically true at all.
Yeah.
That doesn't represent reality.
Yeah, and then I think the last thing that I want to say about this movie, because we haven't really talked about Drew Barrymore's character, and I do like her, but I feel like overall she's kind of a bland character. I think she's just kind of a generic nice girl that doesn't really have a whole lot extra to her other than, just being this woman that's kind of stuck in this marriage of convenience of, for lack of a better term. And that, she gets along with Robbie Hart and, throughout this movie. And uh but other than that, I think maybe I'm spoiled a little bit from her character in 50 First Dates because uh Lucy is a very fully three-dimensional character that has a lot of additional quirks and interests, where here I don't, she's just someone that's she's just a nice girl that's waitressing and wants to get married. Like, do you see any, is
Um,
there something else that I'm not seeing, or do you kind of agree
well,
with that?
I do agree with you on a certain level, though I also want to point out that you have to, I guess you have to think about this in perspective of Adam Sandler's filmography, and especially the fact that this is a Tim Herlihy film as well. And those two are some of Sandler's most legendary productions are because of Tim Herlihy. And this represents Tim Herlihy actually having to yeah, challenge himself and write a better female character for an Adam Sandler movie. And it's a tribute, it's a complete tribute to Drew Barrymore's talent that when they showed this for preview audiences, people didn't want her character taken out to have more Sandler. And I think part of the reason why Sandler had such a low female representation in any film was because preview audiences were reflecting on the edit and they were trying to keep Sandler on screen as much as possible. So I think this character is important in Sandler's filmography, and that led to better female characters and more time for female characters in his film. I do agree it's she's a broad character and there isn't a lot necessarily defining her outside her wants to be married and her wants to be married to a man. This movie has a hard time passing the Bechdel test a lot of the time.
Mhm. Yeah, and I did read in the trivia that apparently Carrie Fisher did a 6 month uncredited rewrite to help improve
Oh
the
man.
Julia character. So I can't even imagine how what
Uh,
her character was like before Carrie Fisher was brought in.
well, her name should be on the script then. That seems like a little bit of robbery. I uh, I feel bad for Carrie Fisher. It seems like she was an integral part of a lot of productions, and because all she was doing was script doctoring, they weren't going to put her on a full writer's credit or anything like that. But she's been involved in some legendary productions.
Hmm. But I think that wraps up my thoughts on this movie. Is there anything else that you have to say about The Wedding Singer?
I guess I don't know what more I can really say. A teen favorite, something. I wanted to point out one more thing before we go, and this is maybe like a little bit of a personal thing, but the moment that Robbie and the the elderly lady whose name I'm forgetting.
Rosie?
Yeah, Rosie. I can never remember her name. I've been watching this movie for 20 something years and I can't remember her name. But the scene between Robbie and Rosie, where they're kind of talking, and she, okay, it starts out as sort of an Adam Sandler type gag thing where they're Rosie is asking him about his penis, and she's worried that he's worried about showing another woman his penis. And Adam Sandler is embarrassed by this, and he is not like egging this on. And it's one of the funnier parts of the movie for me, just because I've known overly overly friendly older people in my life that think they're concerned about me, but they're going a little far in that concern in a way that I don't think is comfortable. But it ends up leading to a conversation about like what Robbie wants in a relationship and like what he thinks a relationship should be. And the crux of that relationship comes down to her telling him that he'll know the right woman not based on how she makes him feel, but how she makes him feel about himself. And that was such an aware, bright line for an Adam Sandler movie. And I think that was probably a pretty good thing for me to hear at that age, even if I wasn't taking it in consciously. Like, I think maybe that affected me a lot. And I think that shows its attitude towards gender politics a lot of the time, and that's trying to, tell young men that love is a stronger thing than looks or attraction based on looks. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that before we got off here because I just think that's an incredibly heartwarming part of that movie, and it really stuff like that really helps it hold up throughout the years.
Yeah, that's a great line, and it's really uh, hits in just the right way, and it's positioned like in the right spot in the movie where it works really well, and it's a solid piece of real life advice, which is not always something that you expect to get whenever you're watching an Adam Sandler movie.
Because it like blends in so well with all the other stuff that's happening in the movie because throughout the movie his family and friends kind of take him aside, and like Sammy is always suggesting that he needs to get laid. At one point his brother-in-law takes him aside and is like talking to him, and his brother-in-law is overly sharing about the sex life him and his sister have. And God, I can't tell you how many times I've had to deal with people just overly sharing about that stuff. Like, no, I don't want to hear about that at all. Like, I don't, that doesn't even help your point or like get across what you're saying to me any better.
Yeah, well, I think that wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for joining me and giving me an excuse to finally watch this movie, one of Adam Sandler's better movies. I did enjoy myself and enjoy the movie, even though it had a few hiccups, but I think there was a lot more good than bad, and I am glad that I had a chance to watch this movie. And I wanted to give you a moment to where you can, plug your other projects and let people know where else you can be found online.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I go through Discord. I'm going to be setting up a couple of other social media accounts of some kind. So please look out. I have a new episode out with Brian Scuttle of Sonic Cinema podcast, and we go over Miller's Crossing, a very interesting Coen Brothers film. I have a new EP coming out with Jesus on the Moon with my friend Jake. Second episode of the Freakazoid podcast is going to be out sometime in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, a lot going on. I hope I can get some eyes on it. I really appreciate you having me on here. This was an interesting time.
Yeah, no problem. And I will be back probably in about a month with another hiatus episode. I'm not sure exactly what movie I'll be covering. Most likely another Adam Sandler movie. I think I might try and go to one of his more serious movies, either Uncut Gems or Punch Drunk Love or something like that. But haven't decided yet. But
have you been through the Spanglish?
I have not.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's a happy medium for you.
Could be. It probably depends on what guest I end up getting, and what movie they're most interested in discussing. So I'll just have to wait and see what comes up. But I do have probably at least 4 of these hiatus episodes, and it seems like I'm aiming for about 1 a month until I decide what I'm going to be doing for the next season. So until next time, I will see you again for breakfast next month.